I'm telling you, they're aliens. By Jeremy Strong. Read by Tony Robinson. Okay, I admit it, I worry. I worry a lot. I like worrying. If I'm not worried about anything, then that worries me. Take corners. I mean, they're nasty things. You never know what's lurking round a corner. There could be an escaped rhinoceros, a mad axe murderer, maybe even a gateway into a parallel universe, one way only. When I was 6, I made myself a really neat gadget. I got a bamboo stick and taped a mirror to the end of it at an angle. When I walked to school, I'd hold it out in front of me and take a good peek round any corners, making sure it was safe round there. Stopping at every corner did slow things down a bit, though. It took hours to reach school, and it drove my mum mad. It didn't take long for everyone at school to discover how worried I was either. On my very first day, when the bell started clanging for morning play, I was out of my seat in a flash and racing for the door. Fire! Fire! We're all going to die! Before Miss Drew could stop us, the whole class was panicking, leaping out of seats, sending chairs flying, scrambling over tables to escape, and shouting and screaming and yelling for Mummy. I mean, just imagine it for yourself. A class full of 4- and 5-year-olds, all trying to save themselves from a non-existent inferno. Miss Drew was mown down by a pack of terrified infants, and it was only the appearance of the head teacher, backed up by the caretaker, the secretary, and 3 dinner ladies, that stopped a tidal wave of teeny toddlers engulfing the school. Somehow they managed to round us up and calm us down, although the head teacher did have to climb up a ladder to pluck me from the tree I'd zoomed up for safety. The extraordinary thing was that nobody was cross with me. They seemed to think it was an easy mistake to make. The trouble was, and still is, that I do worry. I just have this feeling that won't go away, a feeling that some kind of disaster is out there waiting to happen to me. I'm 11 now, and I still worry, and I still use my mirror stick when I think nobody's looking. At school, they think I'm weird. They aren't nasty or anything, although they do laugh at me, and they don't usually want to play with me. I could count the number of friends I have on one hand with no fingers held up. In other words, 0. You see, it's not just the worrying, it's the other things. Like my name. Robert Smith, that's me. I know what you're thinking. What's wrong with Robert Smith? Okay then, try this out for size. Robert Wolfgang Amadeus Smith. That's right, Wolfgang Amadeus. My parents like classical music. Their favourite composer is Mozart, so they gave me his names. Nice one, Mum. Nice one, Dad. I really love you too. I'll tell you one thing. When I grow up, if I survive that long, I will not give my children daft names like Wolfgang Amadeus. And there's something else too. I'm the only boy in my class learning the violin. Well, it was Mum and Dad's idea. I think they're secretly hoping that I'll turn into a real Wolfgang Amadeus. Although I don't really fancy turning into someone who's been dead for more than 200 years. For a start, Mozart wore a wig and knickerbockers and stockings. Can you imagine me turning up at school dressed like that? I don't think so. To tell you the truth, I do like playing the violin. It's just that most of the boys in my class seem to find it amusing. They think I'm different. But we're all different, really, aren't we? I mean, we all have funny little things that we do or think or like. Things we never dare tell anyone in case they laugh at us or think we're stupid. So we keep very quiet and hope they never find out. I used to know a boy who never put just one piece of rubbish into a rubbish bin. He always put in 2 pieces, so that the 2 pieces could talk to each other and wouldn't get lonely. My problem is that a violin case is a bit obvious. It attracts attention and you can't pretend it's anything else. If people come up to you and say, "Hey, is that a violin you're carrying?" you can hardly say, "No, it's a collapsible mountain bike." And as you can tell, I do have a few problems. And the problems are mostly with me, myself. There's not much I can do about that. I can't suddenly stop liking music, or stop worrying for that matter. I can't just change myself. This is how I am. But I do have things that help me get by. One of the best is a brilliant CD-ROM that I use all the time on my computer. It's called Your Horoscope for the Next 50 Years. It tells me what to expect every day, which can be very worrying. You spend the rest of the day waiting for dreadful things to happen. Last Tuesday was pretty embarrassing. I went through the astrological predictions for the day on the computer, and it said the world would end at 23 minutes past 11 because an asteroid was going to smash into planet Earth. Mind you, it did give a horoscope for the next day and the day after that and the day after that, which is a bit weird when you think about it. I mean, if the world's just been destroyed by an asteroid, you can hardly have a future, can you? I warned everyone at school, and would they listen? Of course not. At 22 minutes past 11, we were in the middle of maths, and I climbed underneath my desk. Everyone ignored me, they always do, even Mrs. Ashworth, who teaches me now. She just rolled her eyes and let me get on with it. They're used to it, you see. 23 minutes past 11 arrived, but the asteroid didn't. I gave it another 5 minutes in case the classroom clock was fast, and then crawled out, sat on my seat and got on with my maths. Nobody said a word. Want to know what they call me at school? Chicken Lickin'. I'm sure you're familiar with the story of Chicken Lickin'. Chicken Lickin' is, guess what, a chicken. One day he's asleep beneath an oak tree and an acorn falls on his head. He jumps up terribly worried because he thinks the sky's falling down. He goes racing around the countryside telling all the other animals, the sky's falling down, the sky's falling down, we're all going to die. Soon everyone's rushing about, convinced that they're going to perish because the sky's collapsing. Does it remind you of anything? Like my first day at school and the bell going off? I remember the afternoon Miss Drew read the story of Chicken Lickin' to the class, and everyone turned and stared at me. It was instant recognition. They've called me Chicken Lickin' ever since. They all think I'm a complete waste of space. And then the aliens came. Today's horoscope. An excellent day. You can let yourself relax. The heat is taken off you at work, and you'll be surprised at how easily the day passes. That is truly what it said. I remember it clearly. Well, I suppose nobody can be right all the time, not even Mystic Myrtle the Cosmic Turtle. Just in case you're wondering, that's my CD-ROM program. The astrological charts are presented by this giant galaxy-cruising turtle. It's got really good graphics. Anyhow, my horoscope wasn't exactly accurate because this was the day the new neighbours arrived. The house across the road had been empty for weeks. We were beginning to wonder if anyone would move in. "You're keeping them away with your violin practice," said Dad, and he made squeaky squeak noises and grinned at me. It was meant to be a joke. His one joke, and he repeated it just about every day. Even Mum was getting fed up with it. Then suddenly, bam, we'd got new neighbours. It was like they'd fallen out of space and landed in the house over the road. Which is almost exactly what had happened. I knew they were aliens the first moment I saw them. I could feel it in my body. I got this kind of creeping sensation, as if ants were slowly crawling up and down the inside of my bones. You know how when you see an old bone it's all sort of hollow down the middle like a tunnel? Well, that's where these ants were crawling, up and down. And it worried me. Nobody had seen a removal van. Nobody had seen the new neighbours move in. One moment they weren't there, and the next moment they were. It was just like Star Trek, you know, when they get beamed from one place to another. Only nobody saw it happen. I was in my bedroom doing my violin practice when I noticed him. He looked like a typical human, but I mean, what a giveaway. Aliens coming to our planet always look like ordinary humans. Otherwise you'd spot them a mile off and go round screaming, "Help aliens, aliens invading planet Earth." Well, I would anyhow. He looked about 14. He was lanky, and there was something threatening about the way he just stood there. He was wearing shorts, the really baggy kind that come down past your knees. He had funny hair, too. Well, it wasn't exactly funny. Weird would be a better word. It was very short, and it had a zigzag pattern shaved into it, as if the hairdresser had had some terrifying scare and his electric razor had slipped. I guess it was because his hair was so short that his ears stuck out. They were extraordinary. They sat on the sides of his head like twin satellite dishes. I mean, with ears like those, he could pick up messages from deep space, let alone satellite TV. Anyhow, by this time, I had goose pimples all over, which is a sure sign that I was seriously scared. I was staring down at this boy, and then his mother came out and called to him. She was pretty and well-dressed, but she looked even more worried than me, as if she had some dreadful secret. Which she did, of course. There was something else, too. She had the mark upon her. There was a dark blotch just below her throat. I could tell it wasn't a bruise or anything like that. I zipped downstairs, borrowed Dad's bird-watching binoculars and zoomed in. You know what that mark was? It was a star cluster, a constellation. She might just as well have carried a sticker on her head with the name of a planet written on it. She called to the boy, and he went across to her. She whispered something to him, and they both gazed about as if they were keeping an eye out for something, and their heads made this curious, sharp movement. They looked more like birds or lizards than human beings. I mean, you know, it was strange. I kept out of sight behind my curtains. The mother pointed to the watch on the boy's wrist, and he nodded several times. Then they went indoors. By this time, those ants had invaded every bone in my body. I knew for certain that I had just had a close encounter of the third kind, the kind where you come face to face with a real alien. I had to sit down. I can't take aliens standing up, not straight away at any rate. I sat down on my bed, and I was sweating and breathing hard. The goose pimples had gone, but now my skin was going hot and cold. This was a sure sign of a fever. I was burning up. I've got this really useful book which I use in just such emergencies. I seized the complete medical encyclopedia and skimmed through the pages. It didn't take me long to work out that I was well into the second stage of malaria. Malaria, the curse of the jungle. But I hadn't been anywhere near a jungle. The closest thing to a jungle in my area were the bushes in our front garden. And they weren't exactly infested with malaria-carrying mosquitoes. There was only one possible answer. The aliens had brought it with them. This was no ordinary kind of malaria. This was more like intergalactic malaria, the most deadly kind there could possibly be, with no known cure, and I was the very first victim. I began to wonder how long I had to live. Would my next breath be my last? My throat felt all raspy. My legs had gone weak at the knees. I grabbed a pen and some paper and hastily began scribbling a note. Dear world, I've been killed by a deadly virus brought by aliens living in the house opposite. Be very careful. Do not enter their house without protective clothing. You have been warned. Love, Robert. P.S. I told you this would happen. The love, Robert, at the end seemed a bit wimpy, but what else could I put? Anyway, what would you have done? Just think for a moment. Do you go and tell your parents? It would be like, Mum, aliens have moved in over the road. Oh dear, that is a shame. Make sure you keep your curtains pulled and wear clean underpants. Mum is always telling me to wear clean underpants in case I have an accident. I don't want you ending up in hospital with dirty underwear, she says. Well, I don't want to end up in hospital, full stop. The trouble is, people think you're very strange if you go around saying things about alien invasions. If you're not very careful, they come and take you away and lock you up and feed you on things like rice pudding, which I hate. So, who do you tell? Do you go to the police? Do you tell the kids in your class? They already think I'm half mad anyway, and they wouldn't listen to me anyhow. Not after that episode with a non-existent asteroid. I decided to keep quiet. I thought I'd keep a low profile, pretend there was nothing wrong. But all the time be on the lookout, watching for clues. I'd already discovered that there were 4 of them altogether, and now I had to find out what kind of aliens they were and why they'd come to planet Earth. Actually, the answer to that question was pretty obvious. Aliens only come to Earth for one reason, and that is to take it over, to invade every bit of it. Everyone knows that. I mean, they're not likely to drive halfway across the universe just to ask if they can borrow some sugar. By this time, you'll probably have worked out for yourself that I hadn't taken my last breath and died. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to write this down for you. Evidently, the aliens weren't going to use a deadly virus. They had some other plan up their sleeve. Assuming aliens have sleeves. If they don't, then what can they hide things up? Their nostrils? Armpits? Ears? I seem to be going off track here a bit. You can imagine my surprise and my rampaging feelings when Mum made the following announcement shortly after lunch. "I've met the new neighbours," she said. "They seem nice. I've asked them over for a cup of coffee this afternoon so we can meet the family. The aliens were coming to our house for tea and biscuits." "How many are there?" Dad asked warily. He doesn't like having to make conversation with strangers. "There's Norman and Petal and the parents. I don't know their first names, but their surname is Vork." "Vork!" Dad gave a short laugh, but it wasn't funny to me. It was just so obvious. Aliens were bound to have strange names. I mean, Vork, it was probably an alien word. It probably meant death to all earthlings, or killer king of Krag or something. Mum raised her eyebrows. "That's what they said. I don't suppose they think their surname is funny at all. I hope you won't laugh at them when they come over." "Mum, he wears shorts," I said. "Just right for this weather. You should do the same. Get some air up your legs." "Mum, you are a bit weedy, Robert. You should get more exercise. Eat more." I was silent. The conversation was rapidly moving into What's Wrong with Robert Stage 1. This is the bit where my parents say I need building up. Stage 2 is when they suggest I take up weight training. Stage 3 arrives when they start talking about high-protein diets, fitness programs, and no more watching TV. "What's Mr. Vork like?" asked Dad, and I inwardly sighed with relief. I'd escaped being turned into Muscle Man for the time being. "Oh, he seemed a bit quiet, but he's got sharp eyes." "Sharp?" "Yes, they bore into you, you know. Penetrating eyes, and they dart all over the place. Have you ever noticed how people say really daft things? How can anyone's eyes dart about? They're not fish." Dad asked what Mr. Vork did for a living. "Something to do with computers, that's what his wife said." "Rob, you know Norman's only 14. You could be friends." "With someone called Norman? Nobody's called Norman." "Norman is," said Dad, laughing at his own joke. "Anyhow, you can't write someone off just because of their name." "Oh, yeah, tell me another. What about Wolfgang Amadeus, then, eh? What about that?" Besides, Norman was 14. It was like Mum asking me to be friends with a werewolf. My parents know nothing. "Are you listening, Robert?" "What?" Mum gave a big sigh. "World of your own," she murmured. "I said, just be nice to him when he comes over this afternoon, and little Petal, too. She's only a year and a half old. She looked rather sweet." How could my parents be taken in so easily? "She can talk already," cried Mum, and I thought, of course she can talk. She's an alien. She can probably speak 1,000 languages, and come to think of it, she's probably got 1,000 different tongues to speak them with. But Mum was still going all gooey. "Goodness! Robert didn't learn to talk until he was almost 3. Thank you, Mum." "Is it unusual?" asked Mrs. Vork anxiously, as if she didn't want anyone to think her daughter was any different to other children, and no wonder. I fixed Mrs. Vork with my best I-know-what-you're-up-to kind of stare, and I got a really good peek at that star sign. It was made up of 12 stars in some weird shape, with little lines joining them up round the edges like a dot-to-dot picture. "Robert? Is there something wrong with your neck?" I straightened up, and Mrs. Vork threw me a panicky glance. Oh, yes, I'd got her worried all right. but not half as worried as she'd got me. I mean, she was an alien. You know what they're like. They have laser eyes and stuff. I was pretty sure that the Vorks wouldn't attempt anything yet. They'd be more concerned about their master plan to take over the world. I was wondering if I might borrow some sugar, said Mrs. Vork, and I couldn't help myself. I just had to laugh. I mean, this was so obvious. Everyone turned and looked at me, and the whole room went deadly quiet. Sorry, I muttered. I felt my skin go prickly and flush strawberry from head to toe. Of course you can have some sugar, said Mum. And then she began gurgling at little Petal. She's so clever. And she went into ecstasies over the baby's amazing intelligence yet again. That's nothing, muttered Norman. I could talk when I was 11 months. No, you couldn't, said Mr. Vork, fixing his eyes on his son. Oh, yes, I couldn't. Norman turned away sulkily from his father's threatening gaze. His dad had extraordinary eyebrows like fat black caterpillars. "Give me more!" cried Petal, making a grab for the chocolate cake that Mum had placed on the table. "Just look at her," smiled Dad. I thought, yeah, just look at her. What a greedy pig. "What a greedy pig," said Norman. "Norman? That's what Robert thinks, and I agree with him." I was astonished. How did you know what I was thinking? Norman just snorted back at me. Mum glanced anxiously at everyone. She did want things to go well. "Robert, why don't you take Norman upstairs and show him your computer or your violin while we talk to Mr. and Mrs. Vork?" I was quite pleased about this. It would be a chance to study this alien creature more closely. When we got to my bedroom, he went straight across to my computer. It was time to ask a few probing questions. "Did you really know what I was thinking?" "No." "But I was thinking she was a pig." "Everyone thinks she's a pig," said Norman. "And anyhow, I could talk when I was 11 months, so there, it's no big deal." "Does this computer have a copier?" "A what?" "A copier, you know, for copying things." "Oh, you mean like a photocopier?" Norman gave me a weird look as if I was truly stupid. "Of course not, jellyhead," he sneered. "I mean like copying living things. Dogs, cats, elephants." "You've got a computer that can do that?" Inside, you can bet my mind was going boggle, boggle, but I tried to stay calm. This was like an actual admission. I mean, short of him actually saying I am an alien, this was it. But Norman was getting bored. He seemed to think that my computer was hopelessly out of date. "My dad's in computers," he said. "He knows more about computers than anyone in the universe." "I bet he does." I tried to sound cutting. "Yours is rubbish." Now that was cutting. I shrank back onto the bed. Norman kept glancing round the room. Eventually, he spotted my violin. "Can you play that thing?" "Sort of." "Go on, then." I picked it up and began to play a little piece I'd been working on. The effect it had on Norman was incredible. He kind of doubled up with his hands pressed to his head. He toppled over to one side and began writhing about on the floor. "Oh, come on," I protested. "My playing isn't that bad." I put the violin down, and Norman struggled to his feet. He stared at the little wooden instrument. "That is an instrument of torture," he croaked. "You must have heard a violin before," I said. "Not played like that." He sat on my bed. "What do you do up here all day? I've never been in such a boring room." "What's special about your bedroom, then?" Norman grinned at me. "For a start, I've got an electric guitar and amplifiers," he boasted, "and I've got 2 computers, 3 games decks, and my room is twice as big as yours. I've got a satellite tracker and everything." A satellite tracker. What a giveaway. This was getting scary. I began wishing that Norman would go. "I must get back," muttered Norman. "It's getting late." He'd done it again, read my thoughts. By this time, I didn't just have goose pimples. They were more like elephant pimples. Norman hurried downstairs. His parents were fussing about too, all of them saying that they must get going, despite Mum's offer of another cup of coffee. "Really must rush," insisted Mr. Vork. "Things to do." "How did you 2 boys get on?" asked Mrs. Vork. "He tried to kill me with his violin," Norman muttered, and my dad laughed. "Robert does that to everyone," he said. "He's going to join the army when he gets older, you know. Secret weapon." My dad can be so witty. Mr. Vaughan gave a faint smile. I don't think he realised it was meant to be a joke. He seemed almost edgy. He scratched at the open collar of his shirt. My eyes almost fell out of my head. There it was again. The mark. He had exactly the same star cluster in the same place. "We must go," said Mr. Vaughan, tapping his watch. "Of course, you must have a lot of unpacking," agreed Dad. "Unpacking? From moving in?" "Yes, of course. Come on, Mrs. Vaughan, Norman. We must go unpacking." The new neighbours almost ran across the road to their own house and vanished inside. "Strange people," said Dad. "He called his own wife Mrs. Vaughan as if she was a stranger." "She forgot the sugar," said Mum. "Trust her to fret over the really important issues." After the Vaughans had gone, I started doing some fretting of my own. I was worried. Could Norman really tell what I was thinking? I know he'd said he couldn't, but then he would say that, wouldn't he? And if Norman had this power, did that mean all the Vaughans knew what we were all thinking? There was something else nagging me too. If they were aliens, then what were they really like? Obviously their human form was just a disguise. What did they look like when they weren't playing at being human? And why were they in such a rush to get home? I gazed out of the window across the road towards their house. I could see the slowly setting sun reflected in their windows. And then all at once it came to me. Dracula! They were like vampires. You know how vampires are only vampires at night? During the daytime they have to hide. Maybe these creatures from outer space were like that. Only they had to hide by night because at night time they changed into their real alien forms. And there I was on one side of the street, while on the other side there were 4 aliens poised to take over the world. This was big-time worrying. End of side 1.